Chapter 9. When can we go home? Anaya asked. The blood pressure cuff deflated around her arm, and Mr. Sumner noted the figures on his pad. We want to keep you guys a little longer. You seem fine, which is a miracle, but the doctor wants to make sure there's no delayed reactions. Did you call my parents? Her phone had been melted by the acid goo inside the pit plant. No answer from your mom, Mr. Sumner replied. She must be in the air. And your father's went straight to voicemail. Dad had warned that this would happen. Coverage around the islands and the eco-reserves was always patchy. She swallowed, wishing she could hear their voices. Dad needed to know about these pit plants. What if there were more of them, where he was going? Can you please keep trying? She asked Mr. Sumner. Enviously, she watched as he went to Petra and kissed the top of her head. Okay? Her father asked, and Petra nodded mutely. Mr. Sumner glanced over at Seth. We called Mrs. Antos, he said. She'll be over soon. Thanks. Seth crouched forward in a chair, bony arms and legs jutting from his hospital gown. Anaya looked away from the red scars on his bare arms. The hospital was crammed, and all three of them had been put in the same room. A single bed, 2 armchairs, and a television mounted high on the wall, silently playing a daytime soap that nobody bothered to turn off. Her memory was all choppy. She couldn't even remember changing into the hospital gown. She barely remembered how they'd gotten here. At school, there had been lots of voices, and gloved hands on her, and water sluicing over her. She hadn't wanted to let go of the chainsaw. They kept telling her to let go. She remembered Petra screaming at them not to pour water on her, and in the end they dumped some kind of powder all over her. Another thing she remembered, Teresa being lifted into the back of an ambulance. There were only 3 ambulances on the whole island, and they were all lined up on the school driveway. Is Teresa okay? She asked Petra's father. In the doorway, he turned. She's comfortable now, but they're transferring her to Vancouver, Fleetwood too. But they're going to be okay? They were pretty lucky, really. She was aware he hadn't answered her question. What about Jen Haynes? But he was already gone. As the door closed behind him, noise swirled from the hallway, sneezing and coughing, talking and crying. I think Jen might be dead, Seth said. I saw the firemen working on her, and she wasn't moving or anything. Maybe she was just unconscious, and I tried not to think about how patches of Jen's hair had melted. That gas, it puts you to sleep. Did you guys smell it? It was like really bad perfume. It made Teresa super dopey. Petra didn't say anything. She hadn't talked all that much. Seth said, Fleetwood was really out of it too. It's like they drug you first so you don't struggle as much when the acid comes. But it didn't work on us. Not the gas, not the acid. Anaya had worried that when people saw her unharmed, they'd think she'd saved herself first and let Teresa get really hurt. But she had to climb out because she couldn't. You were brave, Seth said to her, as if reading her thoughts. You too. Most kids didn't even know Seth's name and thought he was just some weird loner, but he was a hero. She felt suddenly self-conscious in her stupid hospital gown. She worried it might gape open. She wished she'd shave her legs. She sat with them tightly crossed. Does your dad know about these plants? Seth asked her. I don't know. Maybe. We saw those tiny little ones, but... Little ones? Petra asked, sitting up in the hospital bed. Yeah, those little black peas from your water bottle. What are you talking about? Seth asked in confusion. Those tiny peas, they grow into huge pit things? Petra demanded. Anaya nodded. I saw a big one at my house. It sent out a giant vine with these weird little sacs that trap animals and sprigs of berries. What did the berries look like? Seth interrupted. Like blueberries, I guess, only smaller and darker. She saw Seth and Petra exchange a look. What? He ate some, Petra said. You did? Anaya heard the amazement in her voice, but right away remembered the hungry rush of saliva in her own mouth. She'd wanted those berries too. They lure animals, and then the sacs open up and trap them. But the biggest traps, those ones grow under the soil. What kind of plant does this? Petra muttered angrily. A bioengineered one, Anaya said. Whoa, wait. Who said? Petra asked. My dad. She probably wasn't supposed to tell. But that was yesterday, and everything felt different now, and much worse. That's what all the scientists are thinking. Well, Seth said, those things are killers. Where did you guys see the vines? Anaya wanted to know. Growing up the trees beside the field. Anaya nodded. That made sense. The bulb grows underground, sends out the vines. She was thinking aloud, trying to order her jittery thoughts. The vines grow high and get sunlight, and those little sac things eat small animals, and maybe that's all energy to feed the bulb underground. It gets big and just waits there, said Petra, for us. Anaya's skin prickled. That's why the black grass wouldn't grow. Seth looked at her, shaking his head. What? The pit plants won't let it. They must send a signal to the black grass to stop it from growing there. Signal? Seth asked. A chemical signal in the soil. Anaya's thoughts were racing now, tumbling over one another. All those other places it doesn't grow. Pastures, school field. Oh my God, the playground by the marina. Those pit things are growing wherever people walk. Yes, anywhere the black grass doesn't grow, Petra told her mother urgently. You've got to close it off. She was making the call from the nurse's station. Phone pressed her ear, a finger plugging the other so she could hear her mum above the noise. She's sure about this? Mum sounded frazzled, and there was plenty of noise at her end too, shouting, and the urgent blurp of sirens. Yes, Petra didn't trust Anaya as a friend, but she trusted her as a brain. They grow underground so they can trap people. All right, I've got to go. I'm so glad you're all right. I love you, Petra. She felt a lump in her throat. You too. She swiped her eyes with a tissue so no tears got on her face and headed back to her room. They'd given her socks the same gross color as the gowns. The stink of singed shoe rubber was still trapped in her nose. On her arms were patches of that weird powder the firefighters had dumped on her to neutralize the acid, which she didn't need at all, but they hadn't listened to her. Her skin looked dry and scaly. She wanted to go home and clean up properly. Her father had said he'd try to find her some hypoallergenic lotion, but he was too busy. The moment she walked into the room, Anaya asked, is she going to close all the parks and playgrounds? And the pastures, yeah, as soon as they can. Anaya exhaled in relief and slumped back in her chair. Thanks. Petra's eyes drifted to the television. She felt like a sleepwalker. Her brain wasn't working very well. For a few mindless seconds, she watched a ridiculously good-looking man and woman argue silently. Seth asked, where did you guys learn to use a chainsaw? Petra shrugged. Most people on the island know. Anaya said, didn't you get a ribbon in that log cutting competition in grade 6? Second place. Your mom taught me too, Anaya said. Oh, right. Petra didn't really want to be reminded of the days when they hung out all the time. I think it was the same camping trip. She acted out how you survive a bear attack, Anaya added. Petra couldn't help smiling at this. The memory was comforting. It seemed like such a long time ago. So, how long have you guys been friends? Seth wanted to know. Said Petra, not knowing what to say next. She glanced at Anaya. That was a while ago, Anaya said, sounding like she'd been the victim of a terrible injustice. Which was so unfair. Petra could tell Seth was looking at her, waiting for more of an explanation. It wasn't my fault, okay, she said. We just don't hang out anymore. Anaya sniffed. You dumped me. That was such a lie. I didn't dump you. It was ridiculous even to be talking about this right now, in a hospital, in disgusting green gowns, when people had just been melted by plants. Anaya said, you started hanging around with Rachel and all those guys, and you stopped inviting me because I wasn't pretty enough. Petra's heart pounded with indignation. No, Anaya, that is not why I stopped inviting you. I stopped inviting you because you told people about my tail. She hadn't uttered that word in a long time, and it was probably a mistake, but it was out, and actually she felt relieved, letting it hang there, stinking, in front of Anaya. See what she said now. What? Seth said, looking totally confused. Tell him, Petra said with a shrug. She loved seeing Anaya squirm. Anaya's eyes fell to her knees. She crossed and uncrossed her legs. She always got to play the wounded bird, the tragic, smart, good girl, rejected by all the pretty, mean girls because she was homely. It was all a big fake. After a while, Anaya said, Okay, I did tell, but only after you dumped me. Before, she looked at Seth. I was born with this weird little tail, a couple of centimeters long. The doctors removed it. Anaya was the only person I ever told, and she promised she'd never tell anyone. Then at lunch one day in front of everyone, she goes, It's so weird Petra's allergic to water when she's half reptile. And then people asked what she meant, and she pretended to look all guilty. You had a tail? Seth asked, looking at her intently. You don't need to look so fascinated, Seth. Lots of people have them. Not lots, Anaya muttered. Petra rounded on Anaya. And then you told Sal Nunez how the tail was a foot long, and when the doctors hacked it off, it flopped around on the floor for a few seconds. Seth saw Anaya smile to herself. Petra punched her on the arm. Ow! And you also told Barb Mueller I kept it in a jar under my bed. Because you didn't invite me to your birthday party, Anaya said. Yeah, because you told everyone I was a freak. And by the way, you didn't invite me to yours either. Anaya was looking at Seth now, shaking her head. It's because I got ugly after my allergies. I didn't dump you because you got ugly, Anaya. I dumped you because you were a jerk. Petra remembered everything. Where everyone was sitting at the lunch table, what they were wearing, the egg salad sandwich half eaten in front of her. Anaya had told everyone about her tail, and Petra had been so shocked she hadn't denied it. It would have been so easy. All she needed to do was lie. It wasn't like Anaya had pictures or proof or anything. But she just sat there in silence, so everyone knew it was true. Then she'd gone to the bathroom and cried. People talked about it afterward for a long time, and it was terrible, but eventually they forgot. What Petra couldn't forget was Anaya's betrayal, and the fact that she never apologized. So Petra started making mean comments about Anaya being a snotty mess, and that was the final nail in the coffin of their friendship. Hey, Seth said, looking past them, we're on TV. It took Petra a couple seconds to understand what she was seeing. It was phone footage of their school field. The image was shaky and pixelated as it zoomed in on the three of them with Teresa, Fleetwood, and Jen off to the side. And right in the middle, the struggling deer. Petra ran to the television and turned up the volume. The camera jerked over to Mr. Hilborn flailing in a pit plant. Shouts and screams came from off-screen. An unseen news anchor was saying, Again, we warn viewers some of the images are disturbing. This is Salt Springs Secondary School, where earlier today several sinkholes opened up, swallowing first a deer and then a man we assume was a teacher from the school. It was like watching one of those joke hidden camera videos, the way Mr. Hilburn got slurped up so suddenly, arms waving. She worried she might start laughing. It was like a cartoon, and then realized she was shivering so hard her teeth were chattering. Maybe turn it off, Seth, she heard Anaya say. No, Petra said, I want to see it. The fact was she couldn't remember very much. Her short-term memory had been yanked out like a flash drive. The news announcer was saying, you can see some of the students on the field running in panic. Like a stranger, Petra watched herself run clumsily with the chainsaw and topple suddenly into a hole. Seth struggled to pull her out and then went in after her. She felt dizzy as the camera ricocheted around from the field to one person to the other as they got swallowed up. According to local authorities, these sinkholes are actually underground plants that seal their victims inside. On screen, a whirling chainsaw blade came jabbing up through the earth over and over, and then Petra watched herself come scrambling out, smoldering. Some of the students, we can't release their names as they're minors, escaped uninjured, and as you'll see, went on to heroically free the others. We're heroes, Seth said dully. Petra didn't want to look anymore. Right now on the screen, she was sitting by herself on the field, doing nothing while Seth and Anaya helped free Teresa, Fleetwood, and Jen. She'd completely fallen apart. Her cheeks burned with shame. Seth started clicking channels. On the next 3, it was just the usual stuff, people renovating houses and calling out answers on game shows and telling each other to drop their guns. But then Seth clicked again, and she was back at the school field watching it all over again. "Turn it off," Anaya said. "It's making me feel sick." The television went dark, and then finally Petra asked the question that had been banging around inside her head like a wasp against a window. "So why didn't the 3 of us get hurt?" "We're the same," Seth said. He didn't know why he said it out loud. He usually kept things to himself, but with these 2, he felt a closeness that was new for him. Anaya and Petra felt important. On the school field, he wasn't being a hero. He just didn't want anything bad to happen to them. "How do you mean same?" Petra asked, her face wary. "Well, we're not like anyone else," he said. "None of us is allergic to the black grass. We didn't get knocked out by the sleeping gas or burned by the acid." Anaya said, "Maybe it's just a fluke. We can't be the only ones." He glanced back at Petra, who sat very still, looking down at her hands. Her fingernails pressed so hard into her skin they left red marks. "I shouldn't have washed with it," she said. "The rainwater I bottled. Maybe that's why I'm different." She looked up with panicked eyes. "I even drank a little." Seth tried to sound reassuring, like one of his social workers. "Well, I didn't drink any of the water, so..." "Yeah, but what about those berries?" Petra said. "How many did you eat?" "I don't know. Maybe they changed you too." He remembered the rush of power he'd felt after eating them. They definitely made him feel stronger and faster. "Okay, hang on," Anaya cut in. "I didn't eat the berries or drink the water, so it can't be that." "Then why are we like this?" Petra demanded. Haltingly, Seth said, "I didn't just mean how we are with the plants. There's other stuff. It's like you were born with a tail, and I was born with..." He wasn't quite ready to say the word wings to them yet, so he pointed at the scars on his arms. "I had surgery when I was about 3. I had all these bony growths." That was the term he'd heard his social worker use once to explain the scars to his new foster parents. "They grew out a couple centimeters, and they were kind of bendy," he paused, "but they weren't bony at all. They looked like feathers." "Whoa," murmured Petra. "And they cut them off?" said Anaya. He nodded, watching their faces closely. "Well, okay," said Anaya. "That's pretty unusual, but I wasn't born with a tail or feathers or anything. Even if I were, I don't see what that's got to do with being immune to the plants." Seth didn't know any better way to explain himself. He wished he could tell them. "You feel sort of like family." He wished he could tell them. "Last night I had a dream. I was flying, and when I came down low over the earth, I saw both of you, and we were all something different and extraordinary." End of chapter 9.